I never thought a color could break my heart, but standing there on the sidewalk, staring at the freshly painted slate gray front door of the house I grew up in, the door that my father and I had spent an entire weekend painting a bright, welcoming cherry red just months before he died, I felt the air completely leave my lungs. It wasn't just the door, the ancient oak tree in the front yard, the one with the tire swing, where I'd spent countless summer afternoons, had been mercilessly chopped down. Only a jagged stump remained, a brutal reminder of something violently ripped away. A stranger's SUV was parked in the driveway. A golden retriever I didn't recognize was barking happily from behind the pristine, newly installed vinyl fence, my childhood home, my sanctuary, the only place on earth where I still felt my father's presence. Sold, gone, completely erased, and my mother hadn't said a single word to me. Let me back up, because to understand the absolute gravity of this betrayal, you need to understand my family dynamic. My name is Maya. I'm 28 now. For as long as I can remember, my family operated on a very specific unspoken hierarchy. My older brother, Lucas, was the golden child. He could do no wrong. He was the athlete, the charmer, the one my mother, Eleanor, paraded around her country club friends like a prize stallion. And me? I was just there. The quiet one. The one who preferred reading in the window seat my dad built for me, over attending my mother's extravagant social mixers. My mother and I never saw eye to eye. To her, everything was about appearances, status, and what the neighbors thought. To my dad, it was about heart. My dad, Thomas, was the glue that held the illusion of our family together. He was a carpenter, a man whose hands were always rough with calluses, but gentle enough to carefully bandage a scraped knee. He built that house on Elm Street from the ground up. He laid every floorboard, carved the intricate banister on the main staircase, and planted the garden in the back. Every inch of that property was infused with his sweat, his love, and his soul. When Dad passed away unexpectedly from a massive heart attack 3 years ago, my world shattered. The grief was a physical weight I couldn't shake. But my mother, her grieving process was different. She didn't cry at the funeral. She complained about the floral arrangements not matching her dress. Within a month, she was already talking about how the house was too big and too full of ghosts. But she promised me. She looked me in the eyes, standing in Dad's old workshop, and promised she would never sell it without talking to me first. She knew what that house meant to me. It was all I had left of him. Fast forward to a crisp Tuesday morning. I was at work, staring at spreadsheets, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Higgins, our elderly next-door neighbor, who used to bake me cookies when I was little. The text read, "Maya, dear, just wanted to say it's lovely to see a young family moving in, but I'll miss you and your mother terribly. Did Eleanor settle in nicely at the new condo?" I stared at the screen. The letters seemed to blur together. Moving in? New condo? My hands started shaking so violently I dropped my pen. I immediately dialed my mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again and again. On the fourth try, she finally picked up. "Maya, really?" Her voice was an irritated sigh. "I am in the middle of a Pilates class. What is so urgent?" "Mom," I choked out, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "I just got a text from Mrs. Higgins. She said a new family is moving into the house. What is she talking about?" There was a dead silence on the line, the kind of silence that confirms your worst nightmares before a single word is spoken. "Oh, for heaven's sake, nosy old bat," my mother muttered under her breath. Then she cleared her throat, her tone shifting to that cold, businesslike cadence she used when she was delivering bad news she didn't care about. "Listen, Maya, I was going to tell you over dinner this weekend. The market was incredibly hot, and I got a cash offer that was simply too good to pass up. We closed last week." You sold the house?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Dad's house? Without telling me?" "It's not Dad's house, Maya. It was my house," she snapped defensively. The property taxes were ridiculous, and frankly, Lucas needed some capital for his new tech startup. The profit from the sale is going to ensure your brother's future. Of course. It always came back to Lucas. She had literally sold my father's legacy, the home he built with his bare hands, to fund my golden child brother's third failed business venture. And she didn't even have the decency to let me say goodbye. My things, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the hurricane inside me. All my childhood things in the attic, Dad's tools in the basement. What did you do with them? Maya, you're 28. It's time to grow up and let go of all that junk. I hired a clearance company. They took everything to the dump before the staging furniture arrived. I kept a few photo albums, but really, you need to stop living in the past. She threw it all away. My father's handcrafted wooden toys, my diaries, the letters Dad wrote me when I went away to college. Trashed, like they meant nothing, like he meant nothing. I hung up the phone without another word. I didn't cry. I think I was too far past crying. A cold, hard knot of pure, unadulterated anger settled in my chest. Which brings me back to the sidewalk, standing there, looking at that slate gray door. I shouldn't have been there. The house legally belonged to strangers now, but there was something my mother didn't know, something only my dad and I knew. Underneath the floorboards in my old bedroom closet, there was a loose plank. Beneath that plank was a metal lockbox. Dad and I had put it there when I was 15. It wasn't money. It was something far more valuable. It held his personal journals, his original blueprints for the house, and a sealed envelope he told me never to open unless he was gone. I had been too heartbroken to go back for it immediately after his death, intending to get it when I was ready to face the memories. My mother thought the clearance company threw everything away, but they wouldn't have looked under the floorboards. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my jacket, and walked up the paved driveway. I didn't care who these new people were. I didn't care if I had to beg, cry, or bribe them. I was not leaving without my father's box. I pressed the doorbell. It played a new, obnoxiously cheerful chime. A moment later, the door swung open. A woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and a baby balanced on her hip stood there. She looked at me, confused. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Hi," I forced a polite smile, though my voice trembled slightly. "I'm so sorry to bother you. My name is Maya. I used to live here. My mother just sold the house to you." The woman's expression instantly shifted from polite confusion to a look of profound, uncomfortable recognition. Her eyes widened, and she took a slight step back, clutching her baby a little tighter. "You're Maya?" she asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Oh my God, you shouldn't be here. Your mother told us you were in a psychiatric facility. She said you were dangerous." "A psychiatric facility?" I repeated, the words hanging in the crisp autumn air like a toxic cloud. For a second, my brain completely short-circuited. I stared at the woman, whose name I didn't even know yet, trying to process the sheer audacity, the absolute venom of my mother's lie. "Your mother said you had a complete mental breakdown after your father passed," the woman stammered, shifting the baby to her other hip, her hand inching back toward the door handle. "She told our real estate agent that you were institutionalized indefinitely, and that selling the house was the only way she could afford your long-term medical care. She even cried at the closing. We felt so terrible for her." A cold, hollow laugh scraped its way up my throat before I could stop it. I didn't want to scare this poor woman, but the absolute sociopathy of my mother's narrative was staggering. She hadn't just sold my father's legacy to fund my golden child brother's ridiculous lifestyle, she had essentially erased my existence, painting me as a tragic, unstable burden to gain sympathy and rush the sale without any pesky questions from the buyers. "I am so incredibly sorry she fed you that story," I said, forcing my hands to unclench, keeping my voice as steady and soothing as possible. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, flipping it open to my driver's license. Then, I pulled out my corporate ID badge. "My name is Maya. I am 28. I work as a senior financial analyst at a firm downtown. I live in an apartment on the west side. I have never been in a psychiatric facility in my entire life. My mother is a pathological liar who wanted to sell this house out from under me to give the cash to my brother. And until 20 minutes ago, I had absolutely no idea this place had been sold." The woman looked from my ID to my face. The fear in her eyes slowly morphed into horror, and then a deep dawning realization. She let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping. "Oh my God," she whispered. I am so sorry. I'm Sarah. Please, come inside." Stepping over the threshold of that house was like walking into an alternate dimension. The layout was the same, the walls were in the same places, but the soul of the house had been violently ripped out. The warm, amber-toned oak floors my dad had laid by hand had been covered up with cheap, sterile, gray vinyl planking, the kind flippers use to make a place look modern. The custom-built bookshelf in the living room, the one with the hidden compartment where Dad used to hide my Christmas presents, was just gone, drywalled over as if it never existed. It took every ounce of my willpower not to break down right there in the entryway. "It looks so different," I murmured, my fingers tracing the edge of a wall where a familiar archway used to be. "We bought it fully staged," Sarah explained gently, walking alongside me. "Your mother insisted on a quick closing. She said she couldn't bear to be in the house another day because of the memories of your supposed condition. She left almost immediately after handing over the keys." "She's a piece of work," I muttered. I turned to Sarah. "I know this is incredibly unorthodox, and this is your home now, but there is a reason I came here. Before my dad died, he hid a lockbox under the floorboards in my old bedroom closet. My mother threw away everything else he ever made or owned. That box is literally the only thing I have left of him. If she didn't know it was there, it should still be intact." Sarah didn't even hesitate. "Show me where it is." We walked up the stairs. The third step still squeaked, a tiny, familiar sound that nearly brought me to my knees. We walked down the hall to the last door on the right. My room. It was currently painted a soft lavender, serving as a nursery for Sarah's baby. I walked over to the closet. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hands against the far back corner. Dad and I had designed this perfectly. You had to press down on the edge of the second plank to pop the third one up. I held my breath, praying the flippers hadn't ripped up the original subfloor here. I pressed. The wood gave way with a soft click, and the plank popped up. I let out a shuddering gasp. There it was. Covered in 3 years of dust, sitting perfectly nestled between the joists, was the heavy black fireproof lockbox. I reached in and pulled it out, its weight a comforting anchor in the surreal nightmare of the afternoon. From my keychain, I pulled off a small, strangely shaped silver key I had carried with me every single day since I was 15 years old. My mother had asked about it once, and I told her it was a diary key. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. When it finally turned, the heavy lid popped open. The smell of sawdust and my dad's Old Spice cologne drifted up from the box, instantly transporting me back to his workshop. Inside were 3 thick leather-bound journals, a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints for a cabin he had always dreamed of building us, and at the very bottom, a thick sealed manila envelope. Across the front, in Dad's sharp, meticulous handwriting, it read, "For Maya. To be opened only when I am gone." "Did you know what was in it?" Sarah asked softly, hovering near the doorway to give me space. "I knew about the journals," I whispered, pulling the envelope out. "I didn't know about this." I broke the wax seal on the back of the envelope. Inside was a stack of legal documents and a single handwritten letter on Dad's personalized stationery. I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, it means my heart finally gave out. The doctors warned me last year that the stress was taking a toll, but I didn't want to worry you. You were doing so well in college, and I wanted you to focus on your future, not my failing health. I am leaving this for you because I have discovered some things that have shaken me to my core, and I need to ensure you are protected when I am no longer here to shield you from your mother. Over the last few months, I noticed discrepancies in the accounts for my contracting business. After doing a quiet audit, I discovered that your brother, Lucas, has been systematically embezzling money from the company for over 2 years to fund his gambling debts and his investments. Worse, Maya, your mother knew. Eleanor has been covering for him, funneling our personal savings into the business to hide the missing funds so I wouldn't find out. They have nearly bankrupted us. The arguments we've had behind closed doors have been vicious. She refuses to hold him accountable. She believes he is destined for greatness and that my life's work is simply the bank to fund it. I know Eleanor. I know that the moment I die, she will liquidate everything to keep Lucas afloat. She will sell the house, our home, and leave you with nothing. I refuse to let her destroy your future for his mistakes. A week ago, I went to a lawyer, a private colleague your mother doesn't know. I have restructured the deed to this house. It is no longer held in joint tenancy with your mother. I have legally severed it. I have placed my 50% ownership of this property into an irrevocable trust, of which you, Maya, are the sole beneficiary. The documents proving this are attached to this letter. Legally, Eleanor cannot sell this house without your explicit notarized consent. Her half is hers, but the house cannot be transferred without you. I hid this because confronting her now would tear the family apart before you graduate. But when the time comes, use this. Do not let her take what is yours. Build your life, my sweet girl. I am so proud of you. Love always, Dad. The letter slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. The ringing in my ears was so loud it drowned out the sound of the baby cooing, embezzling, gambling. My mother had enabled him, let him steal from the father who broke his back to provide for us. And then, the moment Dad was in the ground, she moved to finish the job. But Dad had outsmarted her. I frantically grabbed the legal documents from the envelope. There it was, a recorded deed, filed with the county clerk, transferring Thomas Miller's 50% interest into the Maya Miller Irrevocable Trust. Maya, Sarah asked, her voice laced with deep concern. What is it? You're completely pale. Sarah, I said, my voice eerily calm as the puzzle pieces snapped violently into place. Who exactly handled the closing for this house? Because my mother just sold you a property she didn't legally own. Sarah's face dropped. What? That's impossible. We went through a title company. They did a full title search. Everything came back clear. Your mother signed all the release documents. She couldn't have, I said, standing up, the documents clutched in my fist. My dad put half this house in a trust for me before he died. I am the only one who can authorize the sale of my half. I have never seen these closing documents. I have never signed a single piece of paper regarding this house. Sarah's eyes darted frantically around the room, the realization of what this meant for her family sinking in. If the title was clouded, if the sale was fraudulent, her family's life savings, their mortgage, everything was suddenly tied up in a massive criminal legal mess. Wait, Sarah said, pulling her phone from her pocket. My husband, David, he's a commercial real estate attorney. He handled the back end of the paperwork for us because he didn't trust the seller's agent. Let me call him. We have digital copies of everything your mother submitted. She put the phone on speaker. David answered on the second ring. Sarah quickly, breathlessly explained the situation. The dead silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Sarah, go to my home office. David's voice crackled through the speaker, devoid of any warmth, replaced by pure, razor-sharp legal focus. Open the laptop. The password is our anniversary. Go to the Miller file. Pull up the quitclaim deed and the trust release forms. We ran downstairs to a small room off the kitchen that had been converted into an office. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. She opened a PDF titled Closing Signatures, Final. We scrolled down, past my mother's sweeping, arrogant signature, past the notary stamp. And there, on the line designated for the beneficiary of the trust, was a signature. Oh, Maya Miller. I stared at it. It was a good forgery. It had the same general slant as my handwriting, but the loops on the Y and the A were too sharp, too deliberate. It was the exact way my mother used to sign my name on my school permission slips when she was too busy to read them. That is not my signature, I said quietly. Are you absolutely certain? David asked through the phone. Because Maya, if you are telling the truth, your mother hasn't just breached a contract. She has committed grand theft, real estate fraud, and multiple counts of felony forgery. She defrauded a financial institution and she defrauded us. This is federal territory. I am 100% certain, I said, a dark, terrifying sense of clarity washing over me. The grief and the shock were burning away, leaving behind nothing but cold, weaponized focus. I haven't spoken to my mother in 3 weeks. I didn't even know the house was listed. Okay, David said, his tone shifting into something almost predatory. Sarah, make Maya a cup of tea. Maya, don't leave. I am canceling my afternoon meetings and coming home right now. If your mother thought she could use a forged document to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from her own daughter and defraud my family in the process, she picked the absolute wrong attorney to mess with. Sarah hung up the phone and looked at me. She wasn't scared anymore. She was furious. My mother had dragged an innocent family, a new baby, into her toxic criminal web just to hand cash to a thief. She told me you were crazy, Sarah said, shaking her head in disgust. She looked me right in the eye, with tears streaming down her face, and used your mental health as a weapon to steal our money and your inheritance. My mother is a master of the narrative, I replied, looking down at my father's letter. She always controls the story. She always controls how people see her and how they see me. I carefully placed my dad's letter back into the lockbox, right on top of his blueprints. The frightened, grieving girl who stood on the sidewalk an hour ago was gone. In her place was my father's daughter. "But she made one fatal mistake today, Sarah," I said, looking up at the woman who was quickly becoming my most valuable ally. "She left me out of the script, and now I'm gonna burn her entire stage to the ground." David arrived 30 minutes later, his tires screeching slightly as he pulled into the driveway. He was a tall, imposing man, still wearing his tailored court suit, but his tie was pulled loose and his jaw was set in a hard, unforgiving line. Sarah met him at the door, handing him a mug of black coffee, and quickly ushered him into the kitchen, where I was sitting with my father's lockbox open on the island counter. He didn't offer a polite, empty greeting. He just held out his hand. "Show me." I handed him my father's letter, the original trust documents, and the printed copies of the closing paperwork Sarah had pulled from their files. David put on a pair of reading glasses, and for the next 10 minutes, the kitchen was dead silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of heavy paper. I watched his eyes scan the documents, darting back and forth, comparing the authentic signatures from the trust with the forged signature on the closing deed. When he finally took his glasses off, he let out a slow, sharp breath. He looked directly at me, his expression a mix of professional awe and deep, empathetic anger. "Maya," he started, his voice a low baritone. "As a real estate attorney, I have seen families do terrible things to each other over money. I have seen siblings fight over inheritances, and I've seen children try to swindle their parents. But this is staggering in its brazenness. Your mother didn't just cross a moral line. She drove a bulldozer right through the federal penal code." "How bad is it?" I asked, though my heart was already pounding a steady rhythm of vindication against my ribs. "She committed felony forgery, perjury, and grand theft," David explained, tapping the forged signature with his index finger. "But because this transaction involved a federally insured bank for our mortgage, and because the wire transfer for the purchase funds crossed state lines into her accounts, she has also committed wire fraud and bank fraud. Those are federal offenses. The FBI gets involved in things like this. And the title company, they are going to lose their minds because they insured a fraudulent transaction." "What about you and Sarah?" I asked, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. "This is your home. You bought it in good faith." David reached out and squeezed his wife's hand. "We have title insurance, which will protect our financial investment, but legally, the title is clouded. We technically own your mother's half, but you still own your father's half. The sale is incomplete and fraudulent. However, I am not about to let my family get dragged through a 3-year civil litigation nightmare. And I am certainly not going to let the woman who terrorized my wife and lied about your mental health walk away with our money." "So, what's the play?" I asked. The financial analyst in me was waking up, the part of my brain that dealt in spreadsheets, risk assessment, and ruthless logic. "The play," David said, a dangerous smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, "is that we don't go to the police right this second. If we do, your mother gets a lawyer. She clams up, and it becomes a prolonged investigation where she might try to hide the money or claim you authorized her to sign on your behalf verbally. We need to lock her in. We need her to admit to the forgery, or at least corner her so thoroughly that she has zero defense when the detectives show up." I nodded slowly, the gears in my head turning. "I can track the money. I'm a senior financial analyst. If she funneled that cash into Lucas's so-called startup, there will be a paper trail, public records, LLC filings, social media footprints. Lucas is arrogant. He won't be able to keep quiet if he suddenly has hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Do it," David said. "Take the weekend. Dig up everything you can on your brother's finances. Meanwhile, I am going to draft a comprehensive legal dossier. When we drop the hammer, it won't just be a complaint. It will be a fully prosecuted case wrapped in a bow for the district attorney." I left my childhood home that evening feeling a profound sense of purpose. The grief that had been suffocating me was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating drive. I went back to my apartment, brewed a pot of the strongest coffee I had, and opened my laptop. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I dove into the labyrinth of the public records, corporate registries, and social media analytics. What I found made my blood run absolutely cold. Lucas didn't have a tech startup. He had registered an LLC in Delaware 3 weeks ago, right around the time my mother listed the house. The company had no website, no product, and no employees other than him. It was a shell. But what he did have was a brand new, terrifyingly public digital footprint. On a public Instagram account he thought I didn't know about, Lucas had been posting incessantly over the last 5 days. There was a photo of him leaning against a brand new, matte black Porsche 911 GT3 RS. The caption read, "Seed funding secured, hard work pays off, thus CEO life." Another post showed the view from a luxury penthouse in the financial district, a lease that would easily require $50,000 just for the security deposit and first month's rent. He had photos of a new Rolex Daytona on his wrist, and videos popping vintage champagne at VIP tables and clubs I couldn't even get into. He wasn't investing my father's legacy. He was incinerating it on a gross, narcissistic ego trip. My mother had sold the home my father built with his bare hands, forged my signature, and risked federal prison just so her golden boy could play pretend billionaire on the internet. The sheer injustice of it tasted metallic in my mouth. On Monday morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from my mother. It was the first time she had reached out since hanging up on me the day I found out about the house. "Maya, I know you were upset last week, but it's time to act like an adult and support your family. Lucas is officially launching his new company. We are having a celebration dinner at Le Petit Chateau this Friday at 7 p.m. I expect you to be there. Try to wear something nice." Mom, Le Petit Chateau was the most obnoxiously expensive French restaurant in the city, a place where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was inviting me to watch them celebrate the theft of my inheritance, funded by the very money they stole from me. It was sick. It was a level of psychological cruelty I couldn't fully comprehend. I immediately took a screenshot of the text and sent it to David. His reply came back less than a minute later. "Accept the invitation. We have our stage." I typed back a brief, emotionless response to my mother. "I'll be there." The rest of the week was a blur of meticulous preparation. I met with David twice. He had contacted a private investigator he frequently used for corporate espionage cases. The PI had managed to legally obtain the routing numbers from the title company's escrow payout. It confirmed everything. The entire net profit from the sale of the house, nearly $800,000, had been wired into my mother's account, and within 48 hours, $750,000 of it had been transferred directly into Lucas's sham LLC account. "This is the recorder," David said on Thursday evening, handing me a device the size of a flash drive. "It's voice-activated, high definition, and completely legal in this state, because we are a one-party consent jurisdiction. You are a party to the conversation, so you can record it without telling them. Tape it to the inside of your bra. The microphone is sensitive enough to pick up a whisper across a dinner table." "What exactly do I need to get them to say?" I asked, turning the small piece of plastic over in my hands. "You don't need a cartoonish villain confession," David instructed, his eyes serious. "You just need to establish the facts on tape. Get her to acknowledge that she signed the closing documents without you present. Get Lucas to acknowledge that the money he is spending came from the sale of the house. Act confused, act hurt. Let their arrogance do the talking. People who think they are untouchable love to brag about how they got away with it." Friday night arrived with a chilling rain that washed the city streets in a slick neon glow. I wore a simple tailored black dress, ironically the same one I had worn to my father's funeral. I secured the recorder exactly where David had instructed and took a taxi to the restaurant. When the maitre d' escorted me to the private dining alcove my mother had reserved, my stomach tightened, but my hands were completely steady. They were already there. My mother was radiating a smug, self-satisfied glow, wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet that caught the dim restaurant lighting. Lucas was sitting next to her, looking like a parody of a tech bro, wearing a designer turtleneck and checking his phone with a forced importance. The Rolex on his wrist was blindingly obvious. "Maya," my mother said, not bothering to stand up. She gave me a tight, appraising look. "You actually made an effort. Good. Sit down. We were just ordering the vintage Bordeaux." "Hi, Mom." "Lucas," I said, taking the seat across from them. I folded my hands on the pristine white tablecloth, feeling the hard edge of the hidden recorder pressing against my chest. "I wouldn't miss a celebration. It seems like you both have had a very profitable week. Lucas smirked, leaning back in his chair. You have no idea, little sister. The seed capital came through. The valuation on my new platform is going to be astronomical. You should take notes. Maybe I can hire you to run spreadsheets for my assistants once we go public. I forced a tight, polite smile, channeling every ounce of self-control I possessed. That's amazing, Lucas. Really, raising capital in this economy is so difficult. Who are your angel investors? You must have pitched to a dozen venture capital firms. Lucas faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting to our mother. My mother swooped in smoothly, picking up her wine glass. Oh, Maya, you know how these things work. It's all very complicated financial structuring. The important thing is that the family pulled together to make it happen. I liquidated some assets to give him the push he needed. It's what family does. Liquidated assets, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. You mean Dad's house? You sold the house on Elm Street to fund his company. I sold my house, Maya, she corrected sharply, her tone dropping in temperature. The upkeep was a nightmare, and honestly, it was the best financial decision I've ever made. Your brother is going to triple that investment in a year. I see, I said, keeping my voice soft, almost vulnerable. The bait was set. Now, I just needed her to bite. I just don't understand how you did it so fast, Mom. I was talking to a friend who works in real estate, and she said selling a house usually takes months of paperwork, especially with both your name and Dad's on the original deed. How did you manage all the legal signatures and closing documents by yourself? My mother let out a short, dismissive laugh, taking a sip of her expensive wine. The arrogance radiating off her was palpable. She thought I was just a naive, grieving daughter, incapable of understanding the adult world. She leaned forward, resting her arms on the table, looking at me with a mixture of pity and absolute triumph. Maya, please. You were a complete emotional wreck. You couldn't even hear the word house without bursting into tears. I wasn't going to drag you down to some stuffy title office to sign endless stacks of paper, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I am your mother. I took care of it. A few simple signatures and the problem was solved. The buyers were desperate, the agents were motivated, and I made sure the paperwork reflected what needed to happen to secure your brother's future. It was just a formality. Just a formality, I repeated, letting the words roll around on my tongue like a bitter pill. I kept my eyes wide, projecting nothing but naive confusion. But Mom, I don't understand. The house was in Dad's name too. The real estate agent I talked to said that because Dad died, his half would have to go through probate, or there would be a trust. How did you get around that? Did you just sign my name on the deed? My mother sighed, a harsh, dramatic sound, clearly annoyed that I was ruining the celebratory mood with technicalities. Maya, you are exhausting, she snapped, picking up a piece of artisanal bread. Yes, if you must know the exact bureaucratic details, I signed your name on the trust release forms. I had a friend at the bank who was a notary stamp it later. It was my house. I paid the mortgage for 30 years. I wasn't going to let some dead piece of paper your father drafted in secret stop me from doing what was best for this family. Now, drop it. Drop! We are here to celebrate Lucas. Beside her, Lucas chuckled, taking a massive gulp of his wine. Honestly, Maya, grow up. Welcome to the real world. Sometimes you have to cut a little red tape to make the big moves. Mom did what she had to do. Now I've got the runway to build a 9-figure platform, and you're sitting here crying over a signature. This is why you're just an analyst, and I'm a CEO. I looked at him, really looked at him, the shiny watch, the smug grin, the absolute absence of a moral compass. Then I looked at my mother, who was casually buttering her bread, completely unbothered by the fact that she had just confessed to multiple federal felonies. The waiter appeared out of nowhere, gracefully setting down 3 plates of beautifully plated French cuisine. The smell of rich truffles and roasted duck filled the small alcove. "Enjoy your meal," the waiter murmured before vanishing again. My mother picked up her fork. "I'm not hungry," I said. My voice had changed. The trembling, confused daughter was gone. The tone I used was the exact same cold, deadpan frequency I used when I found a critical error in a junior analyst's financial model. It was the tone of absolute, undeniable execution. My mother paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. She frowned. "Maya, don't start a scene." I didn't say a word. I reached down into my leather tote bag on the floor. I pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it dead center on the pristine white tablecloth, right over the decorative candle. The heavy thud made the silverware rattle. "What is this?" Lucas asked, his smug smile faltering slightly. "That," I said, leaning forward, "is reality." I flipped the folder open. I took the first document, the copy of my father's irrevocable trust, and slid it directly under my mother's plate. "As you so eloquently put it, Mom, Dad drafted a dead piece of paper in secret. Except it wasn't a secret, and it certainly isn't dead. He put his half of the house in an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary, because he absolutely knew, that the second he died, you would liquidate his life's work to pay off Lucas's gambling debts." My mother's face lost all its color. It didn't just drain, it vanished, leaving behind a sickly, chalky white. She stared at the bold legal heading of the trust document, her eyes scanning the text frantically. I didn't give her a second to breathe. I pulled out the next document, the closing deed with my forged signature, and placed it next to the trust. "And this," I continued, my voice slicing through the quiet restaurant, "is the document where you committed felony forgery. You didn't just sign my name, Mom. You committed grand theft. You defrauded a federally insured bank. You engaged in wire fraud when you moved that money across state lines." "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed, pure panic finally breaking through her elegant facade. She lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but I slammed my hand down on them. "No," I said, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "You don't get to hide this. Not anymore." Lucas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Maya, what the hell are you doing? Are you insane? You're trying to ruin my launch over some technicality?" I slowly turned my gaze to him. I pulled out the final stack of papers, the photographs from his public Instagram, the LLC registration, the corporate lease agreement, and the bank routing trace from the private investigator. I threw them across the table. They scattered over his plate of duck confit. "Your launch?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You mean the shell company you registered in Delaware 3 weeks ago? The one with no product, no staff, and no clients? I tracked the wire transfers, Lucas. I know Mom dumped $750,000 of stolen money into your account. And I know you've spent the last 5 days blowing it on a Porsche GT3, a penthouse lease, and vintage champagne. You aren't a CEO. You're a thief playing dress-up with a dead man's money." Lucas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the photo of his Porsche, then up at me, his face morphing into the expression of a cornered, cowardly animal. "You can't prove anything," my mother whispered, her voice shaking violently. "It's my word against yours. I'll say you gave me verbal permission. I'll say you're having an episode. I'll destroy you." I reached up and tapped the center of my chest, right over my collarbone. "We live in a one-party consent state, Mom," I said softly. "And you just spent the last 10 minutes on high-definition audio explaining exactly how you forged my signature, bypassed the notary, and conspired with your friend at the bank to steal my inheritance to fund Lucas. The microphone is extremely sensitive." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. It was the sound of a total, catastrophic collapse. My mother looked like she was going to be physically sick. Lucas sank slowly back into his chair, his hands trembling so badly he had to hide them under the table. "The people you sold the house to," I said, standing up and smoothing down my dress, "are named Sarah and David. You told Sarah I was in a psychiatric ward. You used my mental health to manipulate her. What you didn't know is that David is a senior partner at one of the most ruthless commercial real estate litigation firms in the state, and he is currently drafting a dossier for the district attorney, the FBI, and the State Bar Association regarding your notary friend." I picked up my empty purse. I looked down at the 2 people who were supposed to be my family. They looked small, pathetic, stripped of all their lies and their stolen armor. "I didn't come here to eat," I said quietly. "I came here to look you in the eyes while your world ended. Have a lovely evening. The check is all yours." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the folder of evidence sitting amongst their untouched, ruinously expensive food. When I stepped out into the cool, rainy night, I took a deep breath. The air tasted cleaner than it had in years. The fallout was biblical. David didn't just submit a complaint. He dropped a tactical nuke on their lives. Within 48 hours, the bank froze all of my mother's and Lucas's accounts under suspicion of fraud. The state authorities swooped in on the notary who illegally stamped the documents, which triggered a massive investigation into the title company. Faced with the audio recording and the undeniable paper trail, my mother's high-priced defense attorney advised her to take a plea deal. She narrowly avoided a federal prison sentence by pleading guilty to state-level felony forgery and fraud. She was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution. But because she had given all the money to Lucas, she had to liquidate everything she owned to pay it back. Her condo, her jewelry, her country club membership, all gone. Lucas didn't fare much better. The authorities seized the Porsche, the watch, and terminated the penthouse lease. He was investigated for his part in receiving stolen funds, and while he managed to avoid jail time by turning state's evidence against the notary, his reputation was permanently annihilated. No legitimate business or investor will ever touch him again. He currently works a night shift at a logistics warehouse, living in a cheap studio apartment. As for the house on Elm Street, the fraudulent sale was legally unwound. The title reverted back to its original state, half belonging to my mother, half belonging to my trust. To pay her restitution and avoid prison, my mother was forced by the court to forfeit her 50% equity to me. I became the sole legal owner of the home my father built. I didn't kick Sarah and David out. They were victims in this too. Instead, we sat down with a legitimate lawyer and drew up a real legal contract. I sold them the house for a fair market price. But before we closed, David and I went into my old bedroom. We pulled up the floorboards and I took my father's lockbox home with me. With the money from the legitimate sale, I bought a beautiful piece of land just outside the city. It has a stream, a huge garden, and enough space to breathe. I hired a contractor, handed them my father's original hand-drawn blueprints that I found in his lockbox, and told them to build it exactly as he designed it. Every time I walk through the front door of my new home, I feel him there. My mother tried to erase him, tried to sell his legacy for parts, and tried to rewrite the story to make herself the victim. But she forgot one crucial detail. I am my father's daughter, and I know how to build something strong enough to withstand any storm. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we have to protect ourselves from the most. But, as my dad always taught me, the truth, just like a well-built foundation, will always hold up in the end. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members to protect your peace, please drop a comment below. I read every single one, and this community is proving that none of us are truly alone in these struggles. Also, a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the channel so far. We are incredibly close to hitting our first major milestone of 1,000 subscribers. If you want to help us get there and hear more stories about karma, resilience, and taking your power back, please hit that like button and click subscribe. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and I'll see you in the next story.